been received today, Chairman.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of December 2022 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings? Thank you. Can we note the recent action taken by me under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree the letter to the Mayor on the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime 10 years on?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we note the response from the IOPC to the committee report?
Noted.
Thank you. So we now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Sir Mark Rowley, QPM, Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis, Diana Lutchford, Chief Executive of MOPAC, and Kenny Bowie, Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight at MOPAC. And later in the meeting, we will be joined by Liv Peck, who's the Director of the Violence Reduction Units. So good morning all. Now, before we start the meeting,
Resources in our Department of Professional Standards significantly. We've established an anti-corruption and abuse command, and we've launched the first ever public appeal line through Crime Stoppers, the Crime Stoppers Police Integrity Hotline. And we're getting sort of tens of calls a week to that are leading us to look at new cases. Some of those turn out to be malicious, but some of them turn out to be substantive, and those are generating new caseload. And I think in some ways, the sort of tragedy of the situation we find ourselves in, we are leading the way. It's interesting that even though this is a Met appeal, 1 in 3 of the calls coming through roughly are for other forces that we're passing information on as well. So I think we're sort of, through our challenges, we're helping the rest of the policing confront some issues as well. That's some of the action we're taking so far. I want to talk about review and redress. Clearly, in terms of this particular case, the Home Secretary, I think, has rightly suggested that Lady Eilish Angelini widens the scope of her review to include this case, and we'll support that fully. In terms of things that we're doing, I want to talk about Operation Onyx and about use of data to review the vetting of all officers and staff. So in terms of Operation Onyx, or Project Onyx, what is very clear, isn't it, is that if we haven't been tough enough in our decision-making previously, you have to look back at previous cases and say, are there other cases that we got wrong, where we decided somebody was going to stay in the organisation, and in hindsight, that's wrong. So we've cast the net very wide. If you look at, so we've looked at last decade, officers and staff who have had an allegation which has any hint of sexual misconduct or domestic abuse. So these range from sort of less serious allegations that are sort of largely sort of verbal, for example, all the way through to serious sexual assault allegations. Every one of them has been previously investigated and dealt with as either criminality or misconduct, and come to a position where those people remain in the organisation. What we have to work out is, did we get those decisions right? Some of the reporting in the papers is this is 1,000 new cases, not 1,000 new cases. It's reviewing old cases. And given what we have found so far with the cases that have come to light, like Carrack, we have to assume that whilst I'd be confident that many of the cases we got right, we have to accept that we'll probably find many cases we got wrong, and there'll be people there that we need to have a fresh look at. That might be about their vetting, that might be about reopening investigations. There's all sorts of actions we might take, but the first thing is to systematically review that. And that's a massive piece of work to do that thoroughly. We're confident we know all the officers who have criminal convictions, and people shouldn't be too troubled necessarily about that in itself, because if someone's got a caution as a 13-year-old for possession of cannabis, that's not going to rule them out being a police officer. So there's lots of good reasons why people have been there, as well as bad reasons. But more importantly, the Police National Database, PND, has a much wider intelligence set of arrests and other incidents that go beyond convictions. So we've washed the data, technical people, police, that may be troubling, that we don't know about. Now, you do that wash and you get a big pile of potential positives, which will include positives and false positives. And then that creates a big manual process to sift through those hits, and that's what we're working on at the moment. And that's that refreshed vetting approach that I've heard talked about. I just wanted to explain it in a bit more detail there. And that's the tactic that we're the first people to do it at scale, and that's a tactic that the Home Secretary has now asked that all forces do that tactic as well. On Monday, I spent a day with professional standards teams across 2 or 3 buildings across London, and the positive thing in all this, all the people in there, they're just ordinary police officers who happen to have moved into those roles, some recently, some long time ago. Their passion and commitment to take this on was really uplifting. The last thing I want to say was about accelerating, trying to find faster ways to deal with this. Louise Casey commented on the speed of our cases, and we're trying to improve that. We are unduly restricted by the nature of our regulations, and that concerns me, and it's great that the Home Secretary and Prime Minister have commissioned a rapid review of some of the rules about dismissals and unsatisfactory performance. But regardless of that, we're trying to find other levers ourselves where we can stretch the existing use of the law a bit further and push the boundaries on that to go as fast as possible in what we're doing. But if I step back just to finish off, you will see progress from us step by step as we chase more trust, less crime and high standards, which I'm focusing on here. We must improve dramatically for London. But lifting the stone and revealing painful truths will not be resolved overnight, and I mustn't pretend it will do, and I hope you understand that can't be done. We have to prepare for more painful stories as we confront the issues that we face. We've discussed before the the systemic failings that create these problems of these officers who corrupt our integrity. And as we put in more resource, more assertive tactics, as we're more open to people reporting incidents to us from within and from without the organisation, as we more determinedly take on these cases, it will tackle the problems that we face, but it won't be rapid, and it will be painful. And in that context, we need your support and the support of people of London. Please don't lose heart as we confront these issues, as we do this necessary and painful work to finally confront those and rid the organisation of those who corrupt our integrity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sir Mark. In relation to that, I'm pleased to hear the vetting is being looked at. Would it be better if it was a vetting service for all of the police commands in England?
I think at the moment, because police technology and at this difficult time.
Okay. Later in the meeting, we're going to be talking about trust and confidence, but it concerns me greatly, and it must you, that things are going to come out more and more the more you look at. And we look at today's ghastly reporting on PC Hussein Shihab, who admits 4 counts of sexual activity with a girl aged 13 to 15. And then we find out that he had a role as a safer schools officer. Do you want to comment on that particular case?
No, it's another ghastly case, isn't it?
Yes.
From what we've seen so far, it does look like he was taking part in what you might sort of broadly describe as grooming activity. It is ghastly, and it's going to be really, obviously you've got to apologise to the victims. They shouldn't be facing that at the hands of a police officer and their families. But also it's another one of these cases which will trouble the people of London. I'm sorry for that, and we're going to keep going back to cases like this as we.
Do the problems that probation have got problems, does that increase workload for the police?
I think the Zara Elena case is an awful case, and I think the Director of Probation and the Minister have apologised for the clear mistakes that come out in that case. We try to work really hard with probation. They do recognise their role in protecting the people of London, but clearly they've got issues they need to.
Well, as I say, we have been working with them on issues like supervisory ratios, and we have been talking to them about the culture, and we are now regularly meeting.
In general?
Well, the culture in general over the past few years, as was evidenced by discussions with the previous commissioner, was a growing area of concern following a series of negative incidents which the Mayor has described this committee on previous occasions, including the deaths of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, the Daniel Morgan case, so on and so forth. There is a whole litany of them which reinforced the Mayor's view that an independent review was needed. Which
Yeah, no, I know
then.
it was before, because I'd never picked it up from MOPAC as being an issue, but I'm very pleased to hear you're assisting the Met now. I'll now go to Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Commissioner, firstly, can I welcome your determination to use your words, improve dramatically. That's very reassuring. Can also commend you for all the work that you've done in the last 3 or 4 months. So it's welcome news. And what I particularly welcome is that I think there's been a change of approach in the Met, away from a mode of self-denial to actually accepting that there are serious issues to be grappled with. Commissioner, your opening statement actually really covered the supplementaries I was going to ask you, but I will still put one question to you, which to some extent you already answered, but I still will put this to you. So regarding David Carrick, how was this violent predator able to serve in the police for a number of years, decades even, and the pattern of his behavior go unnoticed and investigated? What was going wrong? Now, I know in your answer to us what you are doing, sort of you have answered my question to some extent, but in 2017, Thames Valley Police spoke to him. In 2019, he assaulted a woman during a domestic incident. The matter was referred to the Met. It was determined he had no case to answer in relation to misconduct. I mean, what was going in the Met at the time? A different commissioner, but you were part of a very important part of the senior management team as well.
So I think if we look back at this, there's a combination of poor policy and poor decisions. And sort of what I'm not going to say is, well, those policies, well, that was the standards and practices of the day. I don't think that's an acceptable answer if the policies don't make sense. I mean, sometimes we can see why things were different then, but they're different now. Other times it doesn't actually make sense. So I don't think that's a defence for this. I fundamentally think at the core of this is an issue about an allegation is made against an officer. It doesn't meet a criminal standard for prosecution. And many of these were investigated by other police forces outside London, Thames Valley, Hertfordshire, etc. So this isn't simply a Met issue. And let's assume those officers and those forces did the best they could do. For whatever reason, there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. And obviously that's a decision that involves CPS generally. The question is, what notice do you take of that after that point? And sometimes on an individual case, when you don't have enough evidence to prosecute, you're still left with a worrying intelligence picture. Sometimes after an investigation, you think, actually, we've investigated this, there's little evidence of any concern about the person it was alleged against. Sometimes you see, actually, no, there's enough in this to make us concerned, even though it doesn't reach a criminal threshold. And too often in the past, that wasn't thought about and said, well, no criminal prosecution, nothing further to see here, push it to one side and we can carry on as normal. So that was the individual issue. And then there's the system issue that even if that's the right decision on one case or 2 cases, you start to get more cases not looking at the system points. And Louise Casey, in her interim review, she's got her final review coming in the next couple of months, her interim review, which focused on the misconduct process, one of her points, if you recall, was, I think her phrase was about joining the dots, actually seeing these patterns of behaviour. And certainly with this individual, even if individual cases didn't provide a lot of evidence to justify dramatic intervention, as you start to see the pattern build over the years, it certainly should have done and it didn't. So that's what we've got to fix, which is why we go into Anti-Corruption and Abuse Command, part of the resources there about increased intelligence, looking at our vetting again. Because of course the 1,000, as you might expect, so that systematic look has not been done as wisely as it could be. So that's the failing, and that's what we've got to fix. And I'm sure underneath it there's probably some cultural issues. It's not just system and policy. I've described there's some cultural issues in terms of people's judgment, but fundamentally those are the failings of cause, and that's why I think when you look at the sort of actions I went through, and I'm not going to repeat them all again, you can see how they're picking off the sort of systemic issues in terms of vetting and data, looking at the picture, being more proactive, more resources in that space. It's all about the same issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the detail at the beginning, which probably answers some questions we may that you know are going through the justice system that we might see coming out in the coming weeks and months.
So, I mean, looking at the sort of just the next few weeks ahead, most weeks there's two or three officers going to court for criminal cases. It's hard to know when these cases will come to conclusion because sometimes they leap forward because something that was a court process hearing, all of a sudden someone decides to change and plead to guilty. So exactly when these cases are finalised isn't always clear. But there's a trickle of them, and we're going to be surfacing more, as I said earlier.
Of course you are, but there's already 2 or 3 a week you're expecting to come out, which is horrific. How long is it going to take you to get through this 1,000 odd cases?
So I've said we've trying to moving heaven and earth. We've got to do it thoroughly too. We've gone through the thousands. There were sort of X that actually we're happy, we're not concerned about. There are Y that we're now putting into vetting reviews. There are Z that we're now putting into fresh investigations. So sort of it'll be that sort of update we'll be able to get to. That's what we're looking to do.
That's the initial bit, and then there'll be months, obviously.
And the months of doing those. Yeah, exactly.
And in terms of your boosted professional standards unit dealing with this work, how many officers have you got in there, and how confident are you about the quality and integrity of those officers, given we saw come out recently a constable in that particular unit is now being investigated over alleged sexual assault of a female colleague? That worries me that you've got people in there who may have a different judgment.
You've looked at in the past. I think you've had a recent session with Commander Southworth about our public protection work more generally. We've basically built a public protection team in sort of professional standards. So those officers who are highly skilled at dealing with victims of rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, because of all the nuances that come with those cases in terms of specialist evidence gathering, the particular importance of victim support. And the particular tactics in doing that in a way that works for women. But I can come back to you with the exact numbers.
Really helpful. That's good to hear. And then, as part of this almost retrospective work you're doing, there is an issue that officers will have left the police and staff, and there may be reasons for that, the behaviour of colleagues, and so on. I was reading a really interesting piece in one of the newspapers, iNews, about an officer who left within 11 months. They'd come from the criminal justice service. They had a lot of experience that could really benefit the police, and it was a culture of dehumanising language, cutting corners, the sort of words she used, or she has used, to describe how they call members of the public, the team she was with. Now, clearly, this is not all police officers, but are you going to look at talking to officers who've left to find out if there are particular reasons, again, to feed into this massive cultural review that you're doing?
Yeah, so we have done some of that, and we're always interested in that feedback. And it's very obvious, isn't it, that our attrition. So as we look at recruiting and attrition, our attrition is higher than we would like it to be, and it must be possible, and it's likely to be true that some of that is because some people are having a bad experience.
Yes.
One of the things that struck me when the Louise Casey report was published, and we were talking about that and talking with officers about how this is not pervasive, because lots of officers have very positive experiences, and I had sort of young black officers say to me, "I'm angry about this report because this isn't true. This is a fantastic organisation. It's the best place I've ever worked." But then you have another black officer doing the same job on a different team saying it's exactly true, and I'm angry because you haven't dealt with this. Which sort of, it goes to the point about this is pockets, but it's too many pockets that exist because systematically we haven't been good enough. And that's the challenge. So it's finding those pockets. And one of the things for the anti-corruption abuse command to do is to be more proactive, using more sort of covert techniques. We're just going live with our sort of lawful business monitoring, which is about being able to monitor internal communications more more intrusively where there's good cause. So using all those tactics where we identify teams that we are concerned about.
Lovely. And exit interviews, of course, as
Exactly,
well.
yes,
Lovely.
exactly.
I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, the Fire Brigade are finding exactly the same. There's pockets of issues. Colleagues, we're going to have to step up the pace, please. Assembly Member Mayama.
Thank you. My question is for Sir Mark. My first one has been answered. But I just wanted to ask you, so Londoners will note that David Carrick is from the same command as Wayne Couzens. And we've heard in the past, there are some bad apples, but it's got to the point where there are so many bad apples, perhaps we need to throw out the whole barrel. And I say that not to kind of say that that's necessarily what needs to happen, but I wonder where you are along that journey, if those pockets are just so intractable, how that's being addressed, if there are clear issues in certain areas.
So I think it's really important that no one interprets me saying there's pockets, that it's just it's a few bad apples. It's more than that. I think I've been very clear about that. There are sort of system failings, and that's the challenge, about being really clear that the majority of our people are really good people and they care about policing London. That's the tens of thousands, but the hundreds have got more traction, and there's more of them because we haven't been strong enough and systematically strong enough. And so I'm not going to talk about particular commands generally. We are looking at units, functions, and working out where do we have warning signs of problematic culture. That might be about high complaints records, it might be about internal reporting, it could be a whole range of different, it could be about the demographics of the team and the movement of people in and out, and what that looks like. Clearly, parliamentary and diplomatic protection, there's been more than one concerning issue, and so we've been doing a big review of that. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Helen Midchap has been leading that, and that's coming to a conclusion and looking at what are the system issues that affect the culture in that environment, and they're finding some quite significant issues. It's an unusual setup, protecting a whole load of premises, armed officers having to be on post at particular times, and the way it's been constructed has undermined the ability of supervisors to supervise, just the setting of hours and rotas, etc. And that's a long conversation that is not for now. But fundamentally, so we're looking at those system issues that can set up the leaders and the team to be successful together, as well as dealing with the sort of toxic individuals such as the ones you mentioned.
Thank you. That's really good to hear and reassuring. Really quickly, I just wanted to ask you if you're confident that the Met's going to meet the deadline of the 31st of March to identify people from the wash that you talked about of the police national computer.
We're going to move hell and high water to get there. There's a lot to get through, but we're determined to try and do that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you. Good morning, Sir Mark. I wanted to get back a point you made a little bit earlier in terms of the morale of your staff, specifically with this drip of these poisonous cases, 2 or 3 a week, you're saying, are going to come through. What are you actually doing to raise or increase or defend morale internally and to reassure your officers and civilian staff there's a better future, a better Met going forward, please?
So generally publicly, I try to keep coming back to the point that we have tens of thousands of great people. Unfortunately, that's never the bit that gets reported, frankly, and so it frustrates them. They understand why that is, but it's frustrating for good people who are in a profession and care about what they do. So keep trying to get the positive stories out there, but there isn't always the bandwidth for them. Internally, there are when we talk about sort of plans going forward and the sort of draft strategy we've published recently, the turnaround plan. One of the strands in there is about setting officers up to succeed, because and support they feel around them is as good as it can be, because they don't feel it is at the moment. I think that's a fair judgment, and we're going to try and tackle that.
And in terms of specific numbers, have you got any retention figures? Because clearly we're in a wonderful jobs market in London at the moment, and they can all go and get a better job elsewhere in terms of money. So in terms of retention numbers, you got anything you can publish to show that number hasn't gone down, dipped during this crisis over the last year or so? And if it has, how it's going to go back up in terms of retention, please?
So we can sort of write in due course with some detailed numbers, but over the last year, our aspiration to grow our police numbers in line with sort of national and local investment is getting more and more difficult. We are going to be high hundreds behind our target for the end of March. I think we've said some of that publicly before, but I'll say it again. So that is a combination of sort of it's both the recruitment and the retention. So the retention issues are steadily creeping up in terms of the numbers leaving, and recruiting. I think we've recruited somewhere around 9,500 in the last 3 years. So I think there's an element of there's probably only so many people who want to be police officers, and you sort of start to sort of exhaust the market. There's certainly the pay competitiveness. I'm very concerned about police officer pay, and some of the stories I hear and some of the research that has been published recently about that. So I think, but sort of clearly, the operating environment and the sort of and the public debate will affect those issues as well. And so we are looking hard at what can we do to try and improve that. But it's very difficult, and the next pay round of reviews is really important for police officers, I think.
Thank you. Of course, there's the extra PCSOs coming in, which is very welcome. Do they go through exactly the same vetting as police officers?
I'd have to double check that. It's very similar. It's certainly very similar. I think there's a little bit more